Hey everybody, this is the progress report for October 12th. But guys, it's almost the middle of October. Less than a month to the midterm elections. Can you believe that? Well, I can believe it because I'm seeing a lot of increasing activity, a lot of increasing interest. And we are so pleased today to have somebody I just really admire for his personal resume. And I want to thank Megan and you, Mike, for putting up such a great summary of Steve's resume. You know, grew up in Manchester, mayor of Portsmouth, candidate for governor, and has never stopped working as an activist. And to this election, he is providing invaluable information and analysis to the candidates, particularly in the down ticket races, the state races. Those are going to be so important this year.
This is stuff that you don't usually get the data. There's not usually someone. So this is really great.
This is filling a void.
We have an expert here today, and we're going to get to talk about it.
And we couldn't be more pleased. And I just as we were waiting in the air, I said, how'd you get into all this? He said, well, when I was a kid, I loved baseball, and my father gave me Bill James Baseball Abstract. I said, well, you got to be a data guy to get into that. I mean, that was dominating the whole psychology and the strategy of baseball, and I guess it's, to some extent it still is. Didn't the Red Sox hire him as a part of their front
I mean,
office
that
team?
to me was nirvana. I mean, it was the moment that the guy I'd been reading about since 1984 when I was 10 years old in the back seat of the Caprice Classic going up and down Elm Street while my parents were, listening to country music, and I was absorbing this material, and then 20 years later, he becomes the special analyst for my team.
Yeah.
I mean, and then, of course, that's when we start winning World Series again. Not a coincidence. Not a coincidence.
Really fascinating stuff. In any event, we have less than a month to go to the midterm elections, and this seems just so extraordinarily timely and appropriate that we concentrate on this now. And by the way, unless I forget it at the end of the show, I want to remind people that, again, thanks to Mike and his lovely daughter, we are now up on YouTube, so I'm not going to talk about the repeats of the show. Mike said, never mind that anymore, although there are 5 repeats. But you can go on YouTube.
You don't have to wait till 3 in the morning. You can go on YouTube anytime you want.
It'll be up within 24 hours of the time we sign off here, and you can catch this show, and you should, because we have the best show here on this whole MPTV, without any doubt.
And I'm going to jump in and I'm going to ask, guys, it helps us if you watch, if you hit the like button, if you subscribe to the channel. That will help us grow the channel, and we've got a lot of things planned. We've got a lot of interactive things planned where you can get back in touch with us, and we're going to try to build a community. But it takes a community to build a community. So if you can help us out, go check out the show on repeat if you missed a part. But hit that like button, hit the subscribe button. Facebook friend us. There's a lot of ways that we can build this community, and we'll be able
by
to
the
have
way, our
conversation.
Facebook page has been revitalized and made much more capable about the show and introducing it, and people like our guest that we have here with us now. But
we haven't even mentioned his name yet.
We haven't? Steve Marchand?
There you go.
Didn't I mention?
I don't know. I mean,
I said, he's a Manchester guy.
We talked all about him.
He grew up on the west side, went to West High School, right?
Goffstown. I went across the Byron Bridge before high school.
Oh, my hometown. I
yes.
should know that.
Penardville.
And Penardville, yeah, that's part of Goffstown, no doubt about it.
Oh, yeah.
And and been a candidate for governor where I thought he ran a very fine race, but came up short. But, this is a really good thing to say, about elections in New Hampshire. You lose one, don't go down. Realize there's another one coming right around the corner, either the next year or the year after that. There'll be another election. And everything you've accomplished in your first effort, you still have there to call upon again. But in any event, then we're not talking about that now, because Steve is not on the ballot this year.
That's right.
But he is doing an enormous amount of work to help the folks that are on the ballot, particularly in our state house, both the state Senate and the House of Representatives. And this is such a critical election for those bodies, as you know. I mentioned this before, but the Supreme Court's shortly going to hear argument in a case that may result saying that the state legislatures can determine the outcome of the elections regardless of who voted for whom and who had the majority in that outcome. They may be given that power. And so,
You're boiling my blood, Bob. You're boiling my blood to hear that. That is such an absurd proposition.
It's just appalling. But all this is to say, these down ticket races are so important, And always in our midterm elections, even more in our presidential elections, people vote for the people at the top because they know about them, they've seen the ads, and then they stop voting as they go down ticket. Don't do that. Don't do that. These races are vitally important. It's not only about, possibly controlling the outcome of the next presidential election, where state legislatures may have a huge role. It's about what our schools are going to be like. It's about how we're going to handle state taxes, and that has a big effect on property taxes. That one truly broad-based tax.
Abortion's up to the states now.
And abortion.
We'll certainly be talking about that up in Concord.
Yep. So, with all of that, and I just want to get right into it here with Steve. So, Steve, you've got something called Move the Goalposts.
That's correct.
And I'm intrigued by that title because I always thought moving the goalposts was kind of cheating.
Right.
And that's what you call this program you're
That's
doing,
right.
Move the Goalposts. So explain that.
So obviously, I'm a big sports fan. The Bill James tip of the hat
so.
already. I was born in 1974 here in Manchester, and Mel Thompson was the governor of New Hampshire when I was born. And Ronald Reagan was becoming an ex-governor of California who was about to take the next step, ran for president in 76 and eventually won in 1980.
Indeed.
So the mid-70s, both here at the state level and nationally, really were the last big moment in a lot of ways in our politics. In fact, we're at the end of this 40-plus year era, which is sort of the rhythm of American politics.
And we're seeing the natural extension of what that change in the early 70s and 1980 did.
And that's what happens. And you could go back in history over the last, every 40 years or so, you kind of reach the denouement, like the natural end of what would happen when something starts, in this case, when I was born in the mid-70s. The goalposts in New Hampshire, and to some extent, I would say in the country, were set at that time in a way that up to now has defined how the two major parties get to talk about issues. The only way we talk about taxes in New Hampshire is based on where the goalposts were set by Mel Thompson and his cohorts.
Axe the tax.
Axe the tax.
His campaign motto was Axe
We
the
still
tax.
talk about it today. Yesterday, Governor Sununu and Tom Sherman, our Democratic nominee, had a debate on the radio, Jack Heath's radio program. I thought it was a lively debate, but there were about 10 minutes of the hour where they just took turns where Sununu basically said, "You want an income tax," and Tom is like, "I didn't support an income tax, and I do not." And it became this sort of defensive posture for 10 minutes that was predicated as if the ghost of Mel Thompson was in charge of what the agenda of it would be.
Yeah.
And by the way, abortion rights. Roe. I was born a few months after Roe came down originally,
73.
and here we are, almost 50 years later, and
it's gone.
It's gone. Like the goalposts have moved in a way now actually further to the right in some of these issues over
So
the
when
last
you say
50
you want the
years.
goalposts, you want them to move back where it's fair.
I want them moved back to, I think, where, frankly, the majority of New Hampshireites think it should be. That certainly as a Democrat, I think they should be. But I think if you look at everything from public polling to the results of a growing number of elections in states at the presidential level, we're finding these goalposts are further to the right ideologically than where the center of America really is.
And they're further to the right because of a number of other factors, I would suggest, and I think you'll probably agree, like the fact that the Republicans in the last decennial years, 2010 and 2020, have controlled the State House and then got to control the redistricting. So that's
100%.
another way the goalposts move in the favor of the other team when it really is not fair that it do so.
With the result being that you have these voter suppression laws that have been widespread.
I mean,
again, moving the goalposts.
The advantages or disadvantages of when you're not in charge of redistricting are difficult to overstate. I mean, one thing to keep in mind, we'll talk about the New Hampshire House here for a second,
Yeah,
because it's a
certainly.
really good microcosm of what you're describing. There are 400 seats in the New Hampshire House. In most of the country, indeed most of the world, this is an extremely bizarre foreign idea, the enormity of the New Hampshire House.
Right.
One of the things that is, and every 10 years we draw up the districts by law, and they're supposed to be within a certain percentage for our viewers at home that probably are not looking at the minutia of this. They have to, these seats have to be within a certain percentage of the same number of residents per district. So the districts have to be roughly equivalent in size. And there's all kinds of rules related to that. So anyway, so here's the thing. whoever has the majority in the legislature and that wins it in the year that ends in 0 basically gets to draw those districts up. And as long as they don't violate the law too egregiously, they get to draw
sometimes
those
even
lines.
if it does.
Which they did this year, and the Supreme Court had to step in and readjust the CD districts.
Yeah, so this is what happens, and then they draw, but they basically eventually try to get the maximum advantage they can without getting kind of pushback from the legal system. So that's what happened again this time. And so what it means is, in order for Democrats at the New Hampshire House level, in order to get a majority, 201 or more of the 400 seats in the legislature, we probably have to win something like 53% of the vote in order to
Instead
get
of
50%
50 plus one.
That's something I find extremely distressing, but it's the truth.
Yeah,
We
I
have a
hate to
caller.
interrupt, but we have a caller,
Sure.
and we love our callers. Thank you, caller, for calling the Progress Report. You're on the air.
Hello, Bob. Hello, Mike. Hello, Steve. This is Bob speaking.
Okay.
How you doing?
In order to win this election for the Democrats, we have to get the vote out. We have to get the undecided voters to vote Democrat. And like you said in the beginning of the show, it weighs heavily on this election for the future of New Hampshire. And I cannot stress enough to get those undecided voters to vote Democrat. There are just as many undecided voters as there are either in the Republican or the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
And again, I say, get the vote out. Make sure that the Democrats talk to these undecided voters and get them to vote Democrat. That's my take for today.
Well,
Thanks
thank
very
you.
much. Thanks
Thank
for
you for
calling.
the contribution. And Steve, I'd like you to comment on that, because the analysis that you've done, which we want to definitely get time to get to, doesn't really talk about that problem of the undervotes, or does it? Or does it?
Well, it gets at a little bit, and indeed, I think it's one of the priorities I have personally in terms of what to do after this election within this effort, is to better understand why Democrats traditionally see more of a drop-off as they go down the ballot compared to Republicans. And what I mean by that is, as you alluded to, Bob, when people show up to vote, even whether it's a presidential year or not, they're going primarily to vote for kind of the sexy races: president, U.S. Senate, governor, even at Congress, which is a sexy, I mean, it's kind of a big deal. You begin to see drop off, though, even begin by then. And now you go to executive council, which has two problems. One is people don't really care much about it. Two, they don't really know what it is. At least a state senator, you have a general idea
what
of
a
what
senator
a senator
is, yeah,
right?
yep.
But as soon as you hit executive council, the history shows, you begin to see this drop off. People that showed up to vote for the top of the ticket begin to say, I'm done here. And they walk out. And if one party is better, for any number of reasons, at getting their voters to stick with it, the further down the ballot, the better for them, that makes a real difference. And so we've seen that in many election cycles, Republicans get 3 or 4% better kind of stickiness at the bottom of the ballot.
Why do you
The
think-
straight ticket. We abolished straight ticket voting, but
Right.
that's shades of the straight ticket.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, what we want is look. Obviously, I want people to vote for my favorite candidates, or I'm a Democrat, lifelong Democrat. But I want people to come out and vote, and I would like them to be informed and to vote for who they believe the best candidates are. And all of our collective job is to convince them that our candidates are the best ones. That's kind of a idealistic way of how it goes. A lot of this is folks go driven by the very top of the ticket, and we have to improve by those couple of extra points. Our voters, or the people that come out to vote for, Maggie Hassan or Tom Sherman or Joe Biden, whatever.
Names that
stick
they've
with
seen
it.
on TV.
Yes.
State reps don't get that kind of exposure. So you get down, and also you're electing, vote for any three. Or,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? You have
This
these.
is a big problem. I was just in Hollis today. I was finishing a day of travel, of sitting down with a lot of candidates. And Hollis, and we can get, I don't want to jump too far ahead on the data, but I'll just start it this way. It's a teaser for a few minutes from now. Hollis, out of the 324 precincts in New Hampshire, towns or wards, so Manchester has 12 precincts, 12 wards. Hollis has one precinct, the town of Hollis. Out of the 324 such precincts in New Hampshire, Hollis is the closest to dead zero in terms of being the ultimate bellwether in New Hampshire. Over the last 7 statewide elections, no town in New Hampshire has voted more identically like the rest of the state as a whole than Hollis, New Hampshire. And Hollis actually is along with a handful of other towns, is a really fascinating microcosm of what is happening politically and demographically in New Hampshire. In Hollis, I asked the candidates down there about what their concerns are. One of their biggest concerns is one of their House districts is a 2-seat district. So voters in that particular district in Hollis get to vote for up to 2 candidates, or 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans that will appear on their ballot. One challenge in the past couple of cycles, so many voters who clearly, when they've had recounts, they can see this, are voting Democrat. They're going right down voting Democrat, but they're only voting for one of the 2 for vote up for up to 2. They're 2 seats, but they see the 2 names and they do what most Americans would do. Oh, I select one. But in New Hampshire, we have these unusual districts.
Yeah.
So they're voting for one. And so that's part of where, in a number of districts, we believe that at a higher percentage than Republicans, we're sort of missing out on that second legal X in the 2-seat district.
Well.
And we got to make some inroads on that, because it will probably be a very narrowly decided House this year. And these handful of seats like this
And
could
by
make
the
the
way,
difference.
there's a candidate in Hollis that I really want to see win and be chairman of the Science, Technology, and Energy Committee, Kat McGee. So
She is fantastic.
She is fantastic, absolutely fantastic. But I want to get on with your analysis here and what you've been doing, and well, give us the broad strokes of what have you been doing. What have you been doing to help the candidates? I believe you've been doing something to help them financially.
Yeah, so
I made a contribution today, Steve.
Oh, well, thank you very much.
And,
Much appreciated.
And you know, so there's that, but you're doing more than that. You're out talking with these candidates and bringing them important data. Tell us about that program and how it's going.
So after I ran for governor, as you alluded to, in 2018, we don't have to spend too much time on that, I lost my primary. I was 44 years old. I had spent time managing campaigns early in my career, governor, president, stuff like that. I'd been a mayor. I just run a vigorous campaign for governor. I love policy, but I'm 44 and I just put all my chips in the middle of the table.
Yeah.
What do I do now? Well, the pandemic happens soon after. And everybody's kind of stuck in their house, right? And even if you wanted to help your favorite candidates, you had limitations on it, in part because of trying to respect the COVID, you know? So I had friends and supporters, many who had been low-dollar contributors, $25, $50, $100, not the big money. And they said, what can we do to help? Well, I love down-ballot races for all the reasons we've talked about already.
Yeah,
so I
that's
said
a
I'll
good
start
thing.
an organization, a political action committee, that's focused on largely collecting a lot of these lower-dollar donor base and identifying, by collecting the data, what the purplish districts for House and Senate primarily were. The places where, you know, if you got $25 and you give it to a U.S. Senate candidate, that's great. But it feels like a drop in the ocean.
And it is.
And it is.
Yeah.
It is, if we're being honest, right?
Yeah.
You know, even governor, Congress, it feels like very little. And these are activists. These are people who care a lot, and they want to feel like they're making a difference. And it's got to be authentic. So I started doing these emails in late summer, early fall 2020. And they weren't the usual political emails some of the viewers may be used to getting, that basically say, you know, if Donald Trump wins or if Joe Biden wins, you know, Hillary will steal your house. Click now, you know, and give $3 or everything goes to crap. And those kind of work, but for most Americans, So mine were much more kind of 538.com, like Nate Silver, that kind of stuff, data-driven. I'd done, and we'll talk about the data in a second, but really it was crunching and showing, look guys, here are the several dozen races out of 400 that are the purplish, the most purple, the ones that if we can get them an extra $100, if we can get them extra volunteer hours, extra expertise.
Could tip the scale, could make the difference.
Because if you tell somebody, hey, this can move your race 15 points in your direction, there are very few races where one's individual effort alone can make this 15, 20-point difference. But a lot of these purple districts, 1 to 3 to maybe 5 points, is by definition the difference between winning and losing. Mm-hmm. These House races are often decided by not 4 digits, they're decided by 2 digits, 60 votes.
I won one by 4 votes. You know what I mean? Not 4 digits.
4 votes. I mean, these recounts are 1 vote. I mean, we had a U.S. Senate race in the 70s that was decided by a couple of votes, and then eventually I think it was a tie
Dirk
for a
and
moment.
Wyman. I'll never forget it.
So, and at these down ballot races, it really does come down to that. that is a very empowering feeling, it turns out. I kind of stumbled into it, where all of a sudden folks said, okay, hold on. So if I only have 25 bucks to give, now I know that this $25, if bundled with 4, 5, 6 other people giving 25 bucks, actually starts giving money. I talked to one candidate today that said, man, here's one tactic I would like to do at the end. This is in Milford. There's a digital, like those traffic billboards, digital billboards that the civic groups can use. And so he's like, I think I'm going to go, and it cost $150 for the last week of the election to have my logo and sign up, and it's flashing nonstop. A lot of cars pass it every day, but I don't want to do that instead of my direct mail or my Facebook ads. It's an add-on. And he said $150. I'm like, well, okay, if you're looking for that, well, we could do that. Like, and for him, that's one less thing he's worried about, and that's one more tactic he can put in the hopper. And of course, you can do more with more money. So you realize you could make a meaningful difference because of the scale. So it worked pretty well in 20, helped about 100 candidates with some form of help, financial and political, and then expanded it. So probably going to raise 3.5 times the money this time that we raised last time. Again, almost all of it, $100 and less. 99% of it in New Hampshire. I mean, people in Colorado don't really care a whole lot about these races, but that's not who we're talking to, right?
Oh, right. No.
And the data's gotten much better. And so basically the baseline for the data is this. We take the last 7 statewide elections, 16, 18, and 20 governor, 2016 and 20 president.
This might be a good time to put up one of your charts.
Oh, this would be a great time. Yeah, we'll see. Let's see how it comes across.
Why don't you put up the chart if you can, Brendan, showing the Manchester
races.
races.
Oh, this is great, yeah.
I don't know what number that is, but the Manchester races, if you got that. Tipping point seat.
There we go. Okay, this is good. This is good.
Done. This is good.
Yep.
Now,
so this
is really good stuff, but you got to understand it.
Yeah. So stick with me for a second, folks. There are 203 House districts in New Hampshire. Manchester's the biggest city. It also has the most state reps. It has 33 out of 400 state reps. So when Manchester gets sneezes, the legislature can get a cold. It's that important. So here are all the districts. You can kind of see them more or less. You see going left to right, the district, the Hillsborough 25, that sort of thing. Which ward in Manchester? It's basically a ward is a seat, more or less, with a few exceptions. That third column are the number of votes that were cast in 2020 in that district. To give you an idea of proportion. So you see, not all districts are the same size exactly. They may have similar populations, but they have different turnouts. And that actually makes a difference for things like the cost of a mailer.
Sure does.
Right? And then this is probably the money shot right here, the PVI.
There you go.
This is what really what we're talking about.
You got to explain this.
Now we're going to explain this. And it really is the core of the work. If you take the best predictor of future performance is past performance. So if we look at the 2016, 18, and 20 governor's races, the 2016 and 20 presidential races, and the 2016 Hassan race, Hassan-Ayotte, and the 2020 Shaheen victory Senate race. Those were the last 7 statewide general elections in New Hampshire. Do some math to it, and basically you end up averaging out how the Democrat did in those 7 races, how the Republican did in those 7 races. That gives you a baseline of how Democrats have won about a little under 49% of the vote in those 7 races. Now do the same thing I just did statewide and compare it to the exact same process in your House district. And the delta, the difference between how the state voted on average in those 7 elections versus how your House district voted in those 7 is represented, maybe we can call that back up now, in the partisan
if we can put
voter
that back up.
Index.
And what does PVI, what are those
Partisan
initials?
Voter Index,
Partisan
I got you.
voter
Partisan
index.
voter index, okay.
So I'm going to take that top one that's in that very light pink, 0.54. That means that Ward 6 of Manchester, in those last 7 big elections, has voted barely half a point more Republican than the state did overall.
Yeah.
And that makes it one of the most bellwether, one of the most similar voting precincts in the entire state.
Yeah.
And it also means it's a pretty good predictor. So like a fun thing you can do, for example, early on election night next month, if you look at these bellwether, so you see Manchester Ward 6, half a point more Republican. Manchester Ward 5,
even closer.
3/10,
Yeah.
less than 3/10 of a
Yeah.
point. Then there's this what they call floatarial district. Long story, basically keeps the numbers in check. And so they have this this district with 2 seats. That's a combination of Ward 6, 8, and 9. It's less than 1 point more Democratic than the state was. So we call that, you see towards the right, D+1. You see the top one,
I
R
see.
+1. So we round it to the nearest number, and we call it, that's a shorthand way of describing how partisan
So in the
the
Manchester
ward is.
contests that are featured
Yes.
in the slide, only the first 2 have an R advantage at
Correct.
all. And that R advantage looks pretty skinny. So what's that tell you?
I'm really surprised at Ward 8 too, because it's a, having lived in it, it's a tough ward, and I would have expected it to be more Republican.
Now
but
keep in mind,
your numbers tell the story.
So keep in mind that the baseline that this is based off of is not 50-50, like a lot of folks. Oh, but remember the baseline has been
turnout.
slightly Republican. So Republicans have won about a little over 51% of the vote in those last 7 elections. So, for example, when you look at Ward 8, Mike, to your point, it's a point and a quarter about more Democratic than the state, which makes it, the bar is about 48.8, add 1.3. So on average, Ward 8 of Manchester has voted about 50.1% for the Democrat, 49.9% for the Republican. I mean, you talk about a narrow race, that's what it is.
I see.
These don't include any municipal elections, right?
Correct. This is just the last 7
State.
statewide elections, partisan races. So here's one of the things. I had an email, and for the folks at home, a shameless plug, move the goalposts nh.com, and then you can sign up, and then you'll get the emails, which if you like this tonight,
All this sort of stuff you'll get.
all this stuff, if you enjoy any of this tonight, you'll enjoy the emails. So one thing you'll notice, keep in mind, if a district is between D+3 and R+3, that is to say 3 points more Democratic than the state, down to 0, back towards 3 points more Republican, that's considered a toss-up. That really is, it's about the quality of the candidate, how hard they're working. Do they have the resources to do mail and Facebook and things like this? What's the national environment like, right? Is it a good night for Democrats? Is it a good night for Republicans? Is your opponent embroiled in a scandal? Or are you a first-time candidate, but you've been a local office holder, where there's a lot of evidence that's a very positive wind at your back as a candidate? When it's that close, then it really depends, is what I'm saying. And anything from R+6 to D+6 is historically flippable. Either side can win, but then you need more things
That's
to
a
go
pretty
your
big
way.
number, but it really has to work out for the underdog there.
So if we could call up the number one more time, this is if there's a takeaway
Okay.
about Manch, I
Okay.
felt Manch go hometown.
Yeah.
Look at this. So except for the bottom one, you might not be able to see. That's Ward 11. That's actually my home ward in Manchester. That's a D+10. So that's an extremely safe Democratic district. If you look, and then Ward 2 is D7, which makes it very solidly Democratic. But look at all the rest of them. Every one of the other ones is very much in the swingable zone.
In the swingable zone.
So a lot of folks out there, a lot of activists, a lot of pundits, presume that Manchester is this overwhelmingly Democratic town, easy peasy. It might as well be Portsmouth or Keene or Hanover, a college town. Because Democrats have 27 of the 33 House seats, it must be because it's easy. Well, it's not. Most of those seats we just looked at are very much competitive.
But we have an excellent city committee on the Democratic side in Manchester.
I'm telling you, if you, and I've sat down, some of these folks I've known forever, right? And some of these are folks that I've met in the last few months, first-time candidates. And my credibility is being straight up. The numbers are the numbers. The candidates are the candidates. I'm not going to go negative on somebody, but I'm going to call it how I see it. I've sat down with many of these new candidates in Manchester. And I'm telling you, the quality of the resume, in many cases, the quality of the campaigning, the retail effort that they've been putting in, is fantastic. I mean, one example I give is there's a ward, and I'm forgetting which one it is off the top of my head, where the 2 incumbents are Republicans and the 2 Democrats are not, right? They're challengers. One is Maxine Mosley.
Yes.
And the other is Holly Hillhouse.
Yep.
So
That was right up at the top for your thing.
yeah, I think
there.
that's 6.
extremely competitive district where if Democrats win either or both of those seats, those are flips. And keeping in mind that The 2020 result was very close. It was 213 Republican, 187 Democrat. You flip 14 seats in the entire state, net, and Democrats have a narrow majority. So every seat matters a lot, which is kind of the ethos of this whole thing. I look at a district like that. Maxine has a resume, a depth of relationship with the community.
Oh, she's awesome.
I mean, you don't get that often in a non-incumbent.
She's been a long time activist and very pro-education, very strong.
Sophisticated, and the whole package. Holly, who will be less known, she's about 30 years old. She works as a clinician, a professional in the field of mental health. And I know where she works. I've known people there that have been on the board and people that have worked there professionally. I can tell you from my recent door-to-door and talking to other candidates, one of the biggest issues in New Hampshire that you don't see talked about a lot in the polling, it doesn't get asked as a polling question. We ask about abortion, we ask about economy, we ask about gun safety, environment, energy, and that's all critically important. Saving democracy, we keep going.
Yeah, that's
but I'll tell you one that doesn't come up explicitly: mental health. But if you talk to people, it is a top 3 issue. It is, especially those with teenagers. I've seen it. It is a top 3 issue. And when I see somebody like Holly, who we endorsed promptly as soon as I got a chance to spend time with her, made a donation, we'll keep supporting her. She would make an outsized impact as a young first-termer because we need more people in this 400-person legislature.
Yeah, we need more people
with that kind of sophistication about mental health. I told her that, she's a difference maker day one. Her and Maxine, outstanding duo of non-incumbents. Manchester does this really well. I could give you other examples. Brandon LeMay knows affordable housing, the issue of housing, another top 5 issue. Young guy, doing the work. These are high-quality non-incumbent candidates, and that's part of why Manchester has elected Democrats punching above its math weight.
Yeah. So we have, I believe, thanks to Matt Wilhelm's efforts and others with him, we have 390 Democratic candidates in the 400 available seats, which way exceeds the Republicans who don't have anything like that. And you have spent, I don't know, maybe you can have an estimate, how many hours you spent on the road meeting these candidates. I know you were out in Goffstown meeting a couple of the new Boston candidates, and I was privileged to be there and watch you interact with them, one being my brother.
That's right.
How many of these folks have you made, and how many are you planning to meet going forward?
Well,
how do you have the time to do all this?
Well, it's first, I hopefully can call on my own experience, both as a manager of candidates early in my career, as well as having been a statewide candidate. So there's an efficiency to how you schedule these things that I take for granted, maybe because I've been around it for 20 years, in all the ways you can do it. But and it's funny, I've actually talked to Matt. You mentioned Matt Wilhelm. Matt, in his role, has to do a ton of this, and he's done it very well. And we'll compare notes sometimes about efficient ways. I could be working for AAA at this point, but it's been thousands of miles over the course of the year. And I love it. Sometimes we can meet with several candidates at one time. Today, we met with multiple at one time this morning. Had lunch in Goffstown with, again, several of the Goffstown candidates and so forth. And that helps a lot, too, because it is 400 legislators. And as I tell folks, it is a small state until you get in your car. And,
exactly.
I got an aunt who's a retired dairy farmer up in Pittsburgh. And that's right up at the border.
Oh, it is.
It's a 40-minute drive from when you enter Pittsburgh from the south to when you'd hit the Canadian border in Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
40 minutes.
Well, it's the biggest town in New Hampshire.
It's enormous. It's actually, get this, it's
Area-wide.
the biggest township in the United States.
No kidding.
By area. Township.
I did not know
We're getting
that.
cute, but it's township
Okay.
On that.
All right.
And so it's a big state, and you get up north and out west in New Hampshire, and it gets rural quickly. And so one thing is, I feel very fortunate. A lot of the candidates, as this has grown, have been very helpful in meeting in places that allow me to maximize the number of face-to-face interactions. So it takes a village, in order to do this, and it just motivates me even more to help people because they are so willing to try to help.
Willing to get
how
to
do
where you are.
Yeah.
How do you do this? You're probably not bringing down a six-figure salary for doing this. I'm guessing.
I'm bringing down 0 figures.
Well, then,
yeah.
how do you do it?
Yeah. So I do work that it used to, for years, both in public life and in my income making life, that has been a very public facing. Now I do a lot more analysis for organizations that is largely political in nature. A lot of my experience in local government will come into play where a lot of teams, and not just in New Hampshire, but I audited city, county, and state governments around the country, where I'll come in as sort of a consultant on a team. I'm not a lawyer, but you'll often have like a legal part of a team, and so I do more of helping folks understand the local governments, the role of land use boards, planning, historic district, ZBAs, and so forth. Both the procedural parts as well as the human part. How do you interact with local governments in a way that's not just going to remain in compliance, but also it's going to be effective. And so that's not sexy in a lot of ways, but it does help pay the bills, and it is flexible enough that has allowed me to pursue with some vigor this thing that I think comes across as a passion of mine and a way to
not too much.
It does.
It's like you go for it. I was a mayor at 31 years old. I was a gubernatorial candidate in my early 40s. The thing you never want to say at the end of something is that you regretted that you didn't put enough juice into it. That you didn't.
Right.
Yeah. And look.
Tough enough to lose, but you don't want to say if only I should have done
Left
this.
something on the table.
And the thing is, folks that know me know. If I'm going, like we're putting all the chips on the table and no regrets.
Yeah.
And that was true in those, which makes it easier to kind of pivot away from that part of my life and into this sort of thing. It turns out it's a lot more fun to help people running than to actually run.
You think that? You really think so?
Certainly at this point in my life, I mean,
No, because you're being enormously helpful.
It's kind of like being a grandparent as opposed to a
really-
parent.
it's a little bit like that.
It's really impressive.
And I enjoy it. And the people I'm meeting are fantastic. I mean, we talked about the quality of the Manchester candidates that get recruited, and that's certainly true. But, I'm seeing this across the board. I mean, nobody's doing this for the glory. Nobody's doing this for the money,
That's for sure.
right? I mean, $100 a year.
That's it.
And a third of the legislature, on average, flips every 2 years, either by being defeated or by not doing it again.
Yep.
So the folks doing it, even the folks I don't agree with on the other side of the aisle, are generally doing it from a civic place. And so you get my respect just off of that right out of the chute.
Yeah.
Steve, you're
So-
talking about candidates. I want to take just a few minutes while we're here together. During the primaries, that's when each party vets their candidates. And we have a situation here in New Hampshire where there's this kind of third force, not just the undeclared voters, which is the third part of the electorate, but there's this third force acting on our politics, and that's the Free State Project, which is an intentional effort to come into New Hampshire in numbers and change our way of life. And I know that you've been active in kind of looking at that and in kind of identifying who among...
Go ahead. I think this might be an appropriate time to take a quick break and have Brendan put up your video on that.
Do you want to take a break, put up the video, or finish, or go ahead with the question? You gave me three options for that one. I'm confused.
Go ahead and finish with your question. And
Well,
let's
the
put up
question
your
is, basically, I would like you to talk a little bit about your observations, having gone through this primary season, where we had Free State candidates on both sides, both parties. We see them in the Republican Party, but they've turned up on the Democratic side as well. And why don't we? I mean, I can put up what I have is a little video about the Free State Project. It's John Stossel doing a report on the Free State Project about 8 years ago, when it was just getting started. And of course, he's gushing about what a great and grand idea this is. But I'd like to talk about, with the benefit of 8 years of hindsight and what you went through. So, Brendan, if you could put that one up, we'll take a minute to look at that.
Right after the founders signed this, our Constitution, Ben Franklin said, "I agree to this Constitution because I think a general government necessary." But then he went on to say, "This is likely to end in despotism, as other forms have done before it." Phew, it's creepy, but true. Most governments go bad. Freedom is not the natural state of things. So 3 cheers for state competition. maybe a rumble between the states will preserve liberty, limit the autocrats' power to take our freedom, because we can move to other states. One group of liberty-loving people decided the best way to increase liberty would be to move from a small state and then get 20,000 other freedom lovers to move to that state too, and then they would have enough votes to prevent big government from dominating their lives. So which state? Well, it would need to be small, so that 20,000 votes would really make a difference. They held a vote, and New Hampshire won. New Hampshire already has lax gun laws, no sales tax, and the freedom to ride a motorcycle without a helmet. And so far, about 14,000 people have agreed to move. 1,000 have moved already. They're not the 20,000, but they're gaining about 30 new members a week. They call themselves the Free State Project. However, New Hampshire's no libertarian paradise. State and local taxes have increased. It's not a right-to-work state. Zoning laws in some areas raised the price of housing. In the Mercatus Freedom ranking, New Hampshire fell from 2nd place to 4th place. But the Free Staters are fighting back. More than a dozen have already been elected to the state legislature. A few practice civil disobedience. When officials told a Free Stater to get this couch off his lawn, he named it Freedom Couch, and he refused to move it. He spent 3 days in jail for that. Mother Jones reports that others have been cited for violating open container laws during a city council meeting, or for indecent exposure and firearms possession at the same time. And this video shows a bunch of them smoking marijuana inside a police station. Police didn't arrest anybody. The Free State Project's having a get-together next month. It's called Pork Fest. Not because of the pork of big government, but because a libertarian mascot is the porcupine, which sends the message, leave me alone. I mind my own business, I won't bother you, but if you intrude on me, remember, I have spikes. It's a good motto. I wish politicians in all 50 states saw people as individuals with prickly quills who want to be left alone. That's our show. I'm John.
Well, there it is. That was John Stossel crowing over this wonderful idea about 8 years ago of sending people to invade New Hampshire and change our way of life. Steve, what do you think? We've had 8 years to look at this.
Yeah.
They've certainly come into our legislature. They're a major force in the Republican Party, and they're making their move on the Democratic Party as well.
Absolutely. So a few things. Going back to the narrow division in the House, 213 to 187, meant that even though the Freedom Caucus, who are not exclusively Free Staters, some are folks that have lived here for their whole life, for example, but have definitely embraced it. When you put them together, it's not like they were the majority of the legislature, but they didn't have to be. They only had to be a critical mass, because even if 40 or so of the members stuck together in sort of this free state ethos, it was enough to basically stop the Republican majority, and Governor Sununu, by the way, from being able to do anything. So part of it was they were able to get Jason Osborne, who's the current majority leader. They leveraged it into having folks in leadership positions, including the majority leader of the New Hampshire House, from that cohort, and to get a lot of things into, for example, the budget bill, which is done once every 2 years in New Hampshire, a biennial budget, and they were able to get a number of items into that budget that, frankly, Governor Sununu probably in some cases didn't really want to have to deal with, but he knew that
including abortion restrictions in a budget.
The abortion restrictions in a budget. That's right, Mike, a budget. And as Governor Sununu said in that debate yesterday, how could I veto that? I'm not going to veto a multi-billion-dollar 2-year budget because of an abortion ban. And then, of course, as Tom Sherman did say, you were willing to veto the budget 2 years earlier because it didn't include your corporate tax cuts you wanted. So to reiterate, a corporate tax cut is a reason to veto a multi-billion-dollar budget, but an abortion ban is not a big enough reason.
Which he said he did not favor.
Right, but look, you're the governor, and it means it. And you get disproportionate credit when things go well. You may get disproportionate blame when things don't. That comes with the territory. But ultimately, you have the pen. You have the ability to veto it. We know this because Governor Sununu vetoed a budget just 2 years earlier. Yeah. So, that's that. So the Free Staters, let's take it back to Manchester for a second. Last month, we had our state primary. And there were a number of Free Staters, and this is not the first time, who saw that they were more likely to win the general election if they were a Democrat than if they were a Republican. And if they ran as a Libertarian or Independent candidate, for better or worse, you pretty much have no chance at winning if you're not one of the two big parties. So in a number of Manchester districts, just last month, a number of well-known Free Staters ran as Democrats, hoping that in what is a very low turnout election, right, primaries have many fewer people that vote than the general, all of a sudden all you need is a couple hundred people maybe to come out that could
same
swing.
tactic they used in Croydon to crush the school board budget.
Exactly. And indeed in Gunstock up in Belknap County, it's the same thing. So when I've done my travel up there, and by the way, what we did, and we played a very small role in it, called them out by name. In the email blast goes out to 14,000 New Hampshireites that are engaged. And we raised thousands of dollars that day that we gave two Democratic candidates that were trying to defend themselves in primaries against the Free Staters masquerading as Democrats in order to help with last-minute communication in their respective campaigns to make sure that people knew what the choice was in that primary. Happy to say, in every one of those cases in Manchester, the masquerading Free Stater was defeated. It won't stop them, but you have to
You gotta
call
know
it
that.
out.
That was a good success, though.
That was a great
Where
success.
there were 5 on, you could vote for 4. The 5th one would be the Free Stater and not be on the ballot.
And in a lot of these districts, the quote legitimate Democrats, the ones that real Democrats, some of them were not incumbents, and that's kind of a scary situation because people generally don't know you that well yet.
It's the name recognition when you get down to that free for all at the bottom of the ballot. The name, they're written small, and there's a bunch of them.
That fourth out of
Yeah.
there's 5. To your point, there was one district in Manchester that had 2 incumbent Democrats and had 2 real Democrats that were non-incumbent, first-time candidates, and then there were a couple of Free Staters. So it was 6 candidates for 4 slots, but 4 of the 6 were not incumbents. And to even a relatively engaged Democratic primary voter, those 4 kind of start looking the same pretty quick, the names.
Sure.
And this is where a couple, how many votes did you win, Mike?
4 votes.
This is what I'm talking about. And this is where also that donor who can give 25 or 50 bucks and feel like a mini drop in the ocean of federal races, all of a sudden
make a
going,
big
hey,
difference.
this is where your money will go tomorrow if we get it
you
today.
get a mailer out or
And we did.
something.
And it's a very empowering feeling for activists that sometimes, can get lost in the shuffle.
Yeah. Well, we've talked a lot about the New Hampshire House coming up, and you've given us a lot of good information, of which I think one of the most important things is to realize that we don't win the House if we get 50% plus 1. It takes more than that. Would you say about 53?
Probably about 53%.
Can I jump in and talk about that? Because I've heard some people arguing that, we're just going to out-hustle them. We're going to out-organize them. We let them throw all of the voter suppression and the gerrymandering and all of these other things that pile on to make it more difficult for Democrats. We'll just get more votes. I reject that argument. Democrats are entitled to their seats at 50 plus 1 vote. 50%, we should not have to go and get 53% in order to be seen as legitimate. And that
But the reality is we do.
that's because people aren't thinking right, because that is not the right, legitimate, seen as legitimate by who? The people who nothing's legitimate if they don't win?
Seen as legitimate by the people that arrange their districts to be
Well,
favorable
they're,
to
they're,
the
they're, they're,
Republican
ooh,
Party.
my blood's boiling again. I'm going to have to be
and I'll
quiet.
tell you what, and I know it's only 2022, but we know the next time that all the chips are on the table for the redistricting after the 2030 election, and when we know when this is going to happen again, it just adds even more importance and value to making sure that you win the majority in the year where the results are going to determine the composition of the legislature that draws the next map.
I mean, I'm
we knew
thinking
that in
2010 we
2010,
got
we knew
smoked
that in
out.
2020.
I know.
And we somehow didn't get the job done in that most important year because people didn't understand how important it was. I don't think it was not an issue that was guiding their votes. We've talked a lot about the House. We haven't talked about the New Hampshire Senate.
yes.
Maybe we'd like to do that because I know you provided a chart on that too.
Yes.
Would you like to go to that one? Brendan, if you can put that one up.
So I think there are
state
2
Senate.
of them that are both about the state Senate. One are the Republican-leaning seats. One is a
That would be
Democrat.
that would be the Republican leaning seats.
Okay,
then.
so let's do it. So there are 24 seats in the state Senate, And this is also part of the redistricting. And I think most observers would say that the Senate map was drawn up in an even more gerrymandered way. Now, one of the reasons is it's easier to do that because you only have to slice the pie 24 ways. So there are more ways to slice it up as compared to the House where, Ward 6 Manchester, okay, guess what? Ward 6 is going to probably be the map. It is what it is. But
Well, Kevin Kavanaugh sure feels like they sliced it up pretty good on him.
I mean, that one, Kevin, who's a great candidate. I mean, you talk about a Democrat who outperformed other Democrats in his district. Outstanding candidate. And by the way, outstanding candidate for executive council this time, running against former mayor, current councilor Ted Gatsas. It was drawn up to be a relatively Republican executive council district, Councilor Gatsas's district. But I think Kevin gives Democrats by far the best opportunity to overcome this sort of drawn up map. And because Kevin really is an outstanding candidate. So let's take a very quick look. These are the 16 of the 24 state Senate districts are Republican leaning. All right. The redder, the more Republican. So you see that if you get to the commuter zone, those communities by the border, there's this narrative that a lot of people have, especially my conservative friends, who say, you want to know why New Hampshire is more purple than it used to be? You want why Shaheen and Hess?
People moving up from
all
Massachusetts.
All those people from Mass. But guess what is saving Republicans right now?
That's right.
All those people from Mass.
There's the data right there. Look at those PVIs on that red zone.
R plus 10.3 in the district that's primarily
Pelham and Salem.
And Pelham. That is these are people from Massachusetts, folks, that are moving up and voting Republican. So then you get to what used to have Exeter, but they took it out because Exeter is very Democratic. And so they redrew it Brentwood, Epping, Kingston, R plus 9. Keep going down, another commuter zone area, Windham, Derry, Hampstead. That's very Republican. And then you get to Londonderry, Auburn, Hudson, also quite Republican district. When you get to the more of that salmon-colored red, these are the ones that are sort of on the edge of competitive, depending on what happens. And you can see there are a ton of those districts. And they go from sort of Rochester, which is one of the most competitive communities in the entire state.
Carol Shea Porter's hometown, and certainly the swing district in District 1, an anchor of that district.
Now, Rochester has become more Republican since the days when Carol first won. If you think about the national trends that helped propel Trump to a narrow victory in 2016, the blue wall falling, the Rust Belt, that sort of thing, we don't have, our state is not that, but we do have communities that demographically look a lot like Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and they include Rochester, Somersworth. Actually, a lot of them as a kid, French-Canadian immigrants, kids. My mom worked at the Pandora Mill in Manchester when she was pregnant with me. Neither of my folks have a high school degree. They're both working class, clawed into the middle class, an awesome immigrant story, right? That story, that is a very Milltown story. Those communities, Claremont, Berlin, parts of Manchester, parts of Nashua, Somersworth, Laconia, Franklin, these mill towns have been moving in a Republican direction over the last 10 years. Trump did not create this. Trump accelerated and exposed it. And so what we see, Rochester has gone from a relatively safe Democratic community to one that now is actually slightly leaning Republican. And it takes that district that we looked at a moment ago, and it now makes that from like an R plus 3-ish to something that's more like R plus 6.
6.97.
6.9, so basically R plus
Almost
7. And as you keep, I don't know if we can pull that chart up one more time, because what you'll see is the real determination about who is going to control the state Senate is the bottom of that list. If you look at Melanie Levesque, 2018 winner in that similar district, narrowly lost to the same person in 2020. They're having a third rematch.
That's right.
And that's a R plus 2. Go down one more. R plus 1.3. Shannon Chandler,
Amherst. Wow.
Won in 2018. Narrowly lost to the same guy in 2020. They're going at it again in 2022. Those two seats will go a long way towards determining who controls the state Senate. And then if you go up one more, most of Coos County, actually all of it, plus Littleton and some parts around there, Sugar Hill,
And I can see that bottom one, Manchester. That's got to be Donna Soucy's district.
That's right.
I can't see it on the screen, but it's.
I mean, something interesting about Donna's district, it actually is narrowly Republican in its performance. Donna, another example of a Manchester Democratic candidate who's able to greatly outperform the sort of statewide numbers. So there are what it tells you is, and by the way, Lou D'Alessandro does the same thing. His district is marginally Democratic. But even when Goffstown was in his district, it no longer is, and that's a more Republican town. Lou was able to greatly outperform other Democrats. And so Lou and Donna are good examples of candidates that, frankly, even people that are voting Republican for U.S. Senate, governor, president, Congress, are then, and this is not easy, they're now voting for Donna and Lou. And that's great news for Democrats in this election. But, and this is part of what I tell Democrats, also, it is a warning. Like, nobody runs forever. Right, so at some point, Lou or Donna and these other districts around the state, make sure you're thinking ahead because Tom Brady, you can win all the Super Bowls when you got the quarterback. We still got Belichick, but if you don't have Brady, you lose your margin of error. So you got to be thinking now about who's going to be the quarterback when the quarterback decides to go back home. And we have to think that way as a party as well.
We blew through 2 breaks that we usually take because this is such an action-packed and information-packed show. We're almost at the end.
Wow.
We have to kind of. Is there another chart you wanted to look at, the Democrat side? If
you know
we're
what?
We're going to have to
do we have the bar? There was a bar graph. I don't know if we have
there
that
it is.
one.
It's
Oh,
up
there
now.
it is. I didn't print it out.
Right,
There it is.
Let's
Super
summarize
quick.
with
I'm glad
this.
you brought
Super
that
quick.
up.
That's a good summary. What you see here, so out of all the House districts, 228 of the 400 begin with a Republican PVI, some by a fraction of a point, some by 15 points. That means the other 172 have a Democratic PVI. They start off with that leaning. This is the shape of the state, the shape of the parties. The next one, you see 83 to 74? Those are the most competitive, the ones with a PVI from 0 to 5. It's pretty close. There are 83 that lean R, 74 that lean D. Now, as you get to the ones that are more and more partisan, the real advantage for Republicans is that they have 139 seats that are 6 to 12, R6 to R12, very difficult to puncture through. Democrats only have 58, but where the Democratic advantage, it's an odd one. The ones that are D13 or more, R13
Those
or
are
more.
Deep blue.
Look at that. So what's that? That's Hanover, Portsmouth, Keene, parts of Concord. It's the College Plymouth. It's these College Durham. So the good news for Democrats is those seats, you don't really have to put much of any resources. Republicans only have 6 seats like that. We have 40. The problem, that 139 to 58, and really the message.
That's where the battle's going to be.
Republicans are inherently more efficient in how they're spread out. They're more rural and suburban and exurban. Democrats tend to be structured around cities and college towns, which means we have more districts that we win huge, but they don't give you extra seats because you win a seat big.
Doesn't matter, yeah.
So that is sort of and that's happening nationally. It's why Trump can win the Electoral College in 2016 with a minority of the vote.
By 7 million.
And that's the exact same dynamic. And it says something about coalitions of the two parties, how they're evolving. That's for another show.
Yep. Wow. Wish we had time. We could go through another hour, but.
If we get time to play one, the comedian video, could you play that?
I don't think we have time to finish it and talk about it. We only got 2 minutes, and it was about 2 minutes.
I really like that one.
We'll hold it over. We'll do it next. We'll do it
That's
next
a
week.
teaser for next week, baby. Yeah.
And I do want to point out, folks, we did have Kevin Kavanaugh on the show, and you can watch his interview on YouTube if you want to go to our YouTube channel.
Of course, we've
Progress Report Live.
We've had June Trisciani. We've had Kevin Kavanaugh. We've had Donna Soucy. We've had Tom Sherman.
Yeah, and June, by the way, we didn't mention her at the show. June, who won the write-in to become the Democratic nominee in that district. Overwhelmingly. I've spent a lot of time with her. Breakfast at Chez Vachon doesn't get better than that. I've watched her at work. She's an outstanding candidate, and she can win that seat. And I think Democrats my organization is prioritizing her. I think Democrats should prioritize June.
I think they should.
Agreed.
I think they will, because she's an unbelievably hard worker and a person that's a delight to be with, too.
Absolutely.
She's a happy warrior. And So this has been great, folks.
Yep.
I want to
Running out of
remind you,
time.
thank you, Steve, for joining us.
Thank
It's
you,
been
guys.
absolutely terrific, and I really admire the work you're doing. I also want to remind you that we will have this show up on YouTube within 24 hours, and for those who can figure out Instagram about the same time, I don't know how that works.
Even sooner.
And we will be back with another show next week with another guy who's made a huge difference in this campaign season in his recruitment of candidates, and that's Matt Wilhelm, who was recognized today as a up-and-coming figure in progressive politics nationally. So we're really looking
beautiful
forward to
thing.
see him, and he may bring a guest with him that we'll be happy to have here too from Exeter. So that's the show for
drumming.
tonight.
See you next week, folks. Thanks for watching.